real you.
Okay, let's play some damn chess with Spitster.
When you were young, you might have real you influence your actions or shape your worldview. It's burrowing deep. It's rewiring your fundamental sense of self. It's erasing parts of you. I mean, think of it like as a rogue program, as like some kind of virus, computer virus. It's changing the fundamental sense of who you are and yourself. Again, erasing parts of you. It's muting certain parts of you. It's rearranging what's left into a very acceptable image, so to speak, of what Christians want. But it's really like a parasite that's subtly feeding on your autonomy until your personality is no longer yours. It's a product of the influence of this system. And that's what we're going to start to get into here in a minute. But just again, like the introduction, so to speak, for today, I've got a lot of things I want to kind of lay the groundwork for, and then we'll dive into some specifics. But I think the process that we're going to talk about today, it's cloaked, as it were. Very stealthy process. It's cloaked in language that seems positive and nurturing on the surface. We were taught that this molding that we're going to go into is for our benefit. That it was God's loving hand transforming us from sinful wretches into sanctified vessels of His grace. We were told that our personalities were being refined and purified. Our character was being transformed by the renewing of our mind, Romans 12:2. We were praised for it, praised for allowing ourselves to be chiseled away at, bit by bit, until nothing unholy remained. We were told it was a privilege, a divine calling, to root out sin, to conquer the flesh, to become more like Christ. And it really did feel like a noble mission. It was worth every ounce of self-sacrifice, self-denial, and struggle.
God damn it.
And yet, I think underneath all those accolades and assurances of divine favor, there was an unsettling reality. We were not being guided to find ourselves, but to lose ourselves. And I know you all know what I speak, because some of you told me as much in exactly those words. You didn't find yourself, you lost yourself. Profoundly lost yourself, utterly lost yourself. And the sense of individuality that we naturally possessed was being slowly but surely suffocated. And every thought that didn't conform, every feeling that didn't align with God's will was gradually crushed under the weight of Scripture and doctrine. And instead of being encouraged to develop your own identity, we were stripped systematically of our identity, replaced with this prepackaged, sanitized, chloroform, cataloged personality that existed solely to serve God's purpose, as defined by the Church.
I
mean, it's a theft of personality so subtle and arguably so sophisticated that most of us didn't recognize it was happening. It's the equivalent of a very slow poisoning of the self, where the toxicity is like a low dose, and you never realize you're being weakened until you can barely remember what being healthy, what being free felt like. And of course, by then it's too late to stop it. And you remember that example they used to tell us in church about the frog in water, where they don't put the frog in boiling water. They put the, I always thought they had the frog, neither story, but you put the frog in regular lukewarm water, room temperature water, to slowly heat it up. But that's sort of what we're talking about. I hate to use that example, but since we're all so familiar with it, I'll bring it in here. But the true horror of it all, besides it being too late to stop it, to realize it, is that we were taught to celebrate it. We were taught to see the destruction of our individuality as evidence of spiritual growth. Think back to the words like crucify yourself. Think back to how many times you were told your natural instincts were of the flesh and needed to be put to death. How often were you or I taught to suppress our desires and to smother our anger, maybe to silence our curiosity. And if you're anything like me, I think we really internalized those messages so deeply that we began to really almost fear our own thoughts and emotions. We were just driven like, I need God's thoughts. I want to make my thoughts, I need to push aside. I need to think God's thoughts after Him, almost like He says it, and I parrot it, I mimic it. And in mimicking it, it becomes mine. You're almost made to feel that even the most innocent of desires, like maybe wanting a certain career, wanting to go on vacation, if it didn't directly serve God, or maybe something like homosexuality, where the idea of loving someone of the wrong gender, quote unquote, these were all rebellious acts that could lead you astray, lead you even to hell. And so you learned to censor yourself. You became your own oppressor. You watched over your thoughts, you monitored your heart, you made sure every word, every emotion, every whisper of desire was in line with what you were told was right. And over time, that censorship became automatic. It became your inner voice. You no longer had to be told to distrust yourself. You just did it instinctively. And that's again what makes it so insidious. It's not that Christianity is just outright destroying your personality. It's commandeering it. It's rewriting it. And then convincing you that this new version of yourself is the real you and is the best version of you. And when you were young, you might have been playful, creative, curious. I know I was. As Legos all the time. Everything was fun and everything was curiosity. But let's see here, 1 second here. Do we have a troll here? We do. Sorry about that. Okay, fix that. Please feel free to let me know if you see anybody else coming. Again, my apologies. It's gonna be part of the process here for the live shoots. But when we were young, we were curious, full of enthusiasm. But as you grew up in the church, and I certainly did, and you were trained to conform to this narrow, prescriptive view of what it means to be a godly person, you're given this list. Either you're given it and/or you make it up yourself. But you have this list of acceptable traits and behaviors: obedient, submissive, humble, self-sacrificing, joyful in the Lord. All the fruits of the Spirit, of course. You're not necessarily joyful in yourself. You're joyful in the Lord. Your unique quirks and inclinations were maybe even discouraged if they didn't fit that mold. We're told, of course, to avoid worldly pursuits. Maybe even some of you may have even been told don't pursue art or science unless they're used strictly to glorify God. So what happens to you when you're curious? What happens to that little kid who wants to know how everything works and take apart gadgets just to see how they work, what's inside? I knew this family that had a little boy where he was so much like that, like Dennis the Menace. You could, if you took him over to a friend's house and he disappeared for 2 minutes, chances were really good that he took apart the front door lock, or he was doing something where you got to keep an eye on. The human mind and certain let's see here. If anyone has seen another troll, just let me know. The human mind is so geared toward exploring. What happens to people who kind of want to either dance, literally, or metaphorically dance in their head or in their room, free from judgment? Where does that spirit of exploration and dancing go? That child and their spirit doesn't just disappear. They are systematically suffocated under layers of doctrine and church culture and shame and self-censorship until that version of you that emerged was an obedient follower, and you barely remember what it feels like to be free. I think a big part of this is, and again, this is just the introduction, but our natural spontaneity, like that, I love that word spontaneity, but our natural spontaneity becomes replaced with caution. Our questioning minds are exchanged for the acceptance of obedience. Your joyful heart was made, so to speak, to beat to this very tempered, somber rhythm, especially if you were growing up in a white culture, whereas we're going to keep our hands down, be real quiet, and if some of you came from Pentecostal groups, so it's a little bit different there. But in a lot of our groups, Christianity didn't just change our personality, it's truly replacing it with an identity that's serving the church, not you. And again, what makes it so effective and so nasty is that it isn't just imposed from the outside. We become complicit in our own erasure. And when we do that, and eventually we become the own enforcer of our own erasure, of our own subjugation, we think that every piece of ourselves has to be cut away. And every time we do it, we're a step closer to God and to holiness. And so I want to ask today, how does this happen? What are the psychological mechanisms that are allowing these shifts to occur, especially in our childhood, but even well into our adulthood? And one of the most effective tools I think that we're going to start with is emotional manipulation. things like guilt and shame, they're wielded like weapons, and they're going to mold our self-perception until we no longer trust our own mind. I think about the most natural human emotions: anger, desire, even joy. They're labeled as either sinful or suspect until they're channeled into these prescribed godly outlets. How many of us were told your anger does not please God? God's allowed to be angry, but you can't. Anger is, it only becomes righteous in a sense if it's directed at sin or the world. Like, I hate my sin, I hate my fleshly self, I hate the world where Satan is in charge. But, desire is permissible only when it's focused on, heterosexual marriage for the purpose perhaps of procreation. But even then, like, eroticism, even in a heterosexual marriage, wasn't necessarily celebrated in many of our church contexts. Joy itself is only celebrated in the sense of, is it joy in the Lord? Are you allowed to joy in your own success or your own just self-expression? It's like your inner landscape, my inner landscape, became something almost foreign to us. That's one of the things that I really reflect on a lot is when you're a Christian, you're not safe in your own skin. You yourself become a dangerous territory to yourself. You have to carefully navigate yourself. Otherwise, you're going to step into temptation and rebellion. And that manipulation gives you, instills in you this permanent sense of wariness. Like, where am I going to fall here? I remember my dad one time, even kind of applying this. He was driving me home from Bible college one time, and we're driving. He said, Tim, you seem like you're doing really well at everything. Like, you're doing great in your classes. You're involved in ministry. You're preaching. You're this. You're that. Like, everything you're wanted to do for right now is falling along. And then he said, So how do you think Satan's going to pull you down? How do you think you're going to lose? How do you think you're going to end up tripping up? It was just like an implication, like everybody has an Achilles heel. There is yours. Part of your selfishness or your sinfulness is going to come and rear its ugly head.
Kiss that whore goodbye.
So you begin to question yourself. Almost every surge of emotion even can be a potentially harmful invader instead of just a natural response.
Stupid! Because that was
your ability
stupid!
to feel genuinely. And when you suppress yourself and your desires, your emotions, you lose touch with yourself over time. I think about how people, when they get into this emotional repression stuff, it really does lead to a host of issues.
Stupid.
I think about people that people have talked about this kind of stuff. People, when they repress themselves, you're not fixing it, you're burying it, right? It leads to anxiety or depression, and for sure, like a diminished sense of self-awareness. It's like you become numb to your own emotional cues. Like, you're not sure, why am I feeling this way? What am I feeling? The church sort of almost convinces you that numbness is a form of the peace of God. Like, that's the stillness of the spirit. And in reality, it could very much be like a psychological deadening, where it's like kind of flattening your emotional world. And I know there were many, many times when I feel like that was what I was experiencing. I was feeling everything is stable, but maybe that stability was manufactured and fake. I mean, where did some of these things start, where you felt shame for just existing as part of yourself? Was it as a child? I know for me it certainly was. When you showed anger, were you told that's unloving? There's never a spot for unloving, for angry behavior. That's just so unrighteous. When you ask questions about God, were you chastised, so to speak? Told that that's not appropriate. You don't ask those hard questions. I've had people say that, like where they said, I asked hard questions and I got reprimanded. I literally metaphorically got the nun to slap my wrist with a ruler. These experiences start to plant seeds of doubt for our landscape. They condition us to see our feelings as something external. Like, these are your feelings. They don't really belong to you, and they're attacking you. It's funny, one of the things that's really interesting to see right now is that movie Inside Out. Have some of you seen that, probably? There's now version 2, or Inside Out 2 is out as well on Disney+. My kids have watched that a couple times, and I haven't watched them straight through, but I've watched 30-40% of them here or there, enough to get the gist of it. But it's fascinating I love how they validate, like, there's all these parts of your personality that are part of you. And in Christianity, I think if you could come up with an Inside Out that was written by Christians, they would have vilified so many of those characters in Riley's head. this process, what the church is doing is alienating you from your emotions, leading you to what you might call it like a disassociation, where you can no longer discern what you feel and why, and you're becoming a stranger to yourself. And that repression isn't just for the negative emotions, even positive emotions like happiness and excitement. You have to monitor them and measure them. For me, for example, one of the things
that was stupid.
Really affected me was somebody preached a message and they said, look, when you look at a group of people watching football on Sunday afternoon, say it's 2 or 3 hours of the show, and some of them are really excited about their team, and of course they finally get a touchdown, like, yes! They stand up from the sofa and they scream, whatever, they're so excited. And I remember a guy preaching about saying, are you as excited about the things of the Lord as you are about a completely frivolous, passing, temporary football game? Are you as excited about eternal things? And that really convicted me, oh my gosh, you're right. I shouldn't be happy about a football team and much less happy about the Lord. When the Lord gets a touchdown, am I shouting and standing up and excited? It's well, you need to suppress that then, because you're happy for selfish reasons. And all those things, whether it's that or personal achievement, if your joy is not rooted in the gospel and in spreading it, then your emotions need to be sort of weighed and judged. And if you're not tying that to religious devotion, you need to just trust that, even your own joy. You need to view it as a snare instead of just a natural human experience. And all these things, again, this is just the groundwork. These are laying the groundwork for damage, the manipulation that is extending into your very sense of your morality, your self-worth, your identity. And your worth is no longer inherent or intrinsic. It's determined on how closely you conform to these external standards that the church has given you. And of course, they're based on scriptures, constantly reminding you you're a wretch, you're dead in your sins, any good within you is not yours, but it's a reflection of Christ that's living in you. And it's creating a perpetual state of dependency and self-doubt. You don't measure yourself by your own achievement or growth. You measure yourself by how well you're aligned with God or the doctrines or the Bible. I think, I'd want to ask, how many of you have felt guilt and shame for some of these things, even for just something, desiring anything outside of the church's approval, like, again, a career? Maybe, what if you wanted to date somebody that wasn't a Christian or from your specific denomination? I think some of us felt like if it wasn't explicitly and even overwhelmingly Christian, it gets demonized. And you're made to think that these natural, healthy longings are just evidence of your sinful nature or your lack of commitment to God, maybe even trapped from Satan.
God damn it.
The one word, it's a big word, but I've heard it before. It's a psychological word. It's called introjection. You ever heard of that word? It's when your external values become internalized to the point where they become indistinguishable from your own self-judgment. So you start to monitor yourself and condemn yourself using the church's standards, even when no one else is around to enforce them. It's like, if you were in North Korea, for example, and you're told all the time, every single time that you walk by a statue of, Kim Jong-il, Kim Jong-un, whatever, the dear leader, you have to, salute or bow. You have to honor them in some way. If that's in you all the time, and that there are cameras looking to see, that person did or did not do this. And then you go into a place where you look around and there are no cameras, you don't think. But there's a statue of the dear leader. And you think to yourself, I don't think there's cameras here. I'm probably safe to not do this. You wouldn't do that. You wouldn't think to yourself, how do I get away with not bowing down before this statue? You would just naturally do it because it's part of who you've become. You don't need those cameras. You don't need to know if there's actually cameras that are hidden there, or if you're truly free to choose. You're no longer free to choose. It just becomes part of your habit. You police yourself. And it's creating a split in your personality. There's maybe a part of you that wants to explore, to express something, to live fully, freely. But then there's this part of you that's trained to keep those thoughts under lock and key. And that psychological strain of that duality, really, like you have two personalities, it is immense and overwhelming. Christianity molded us into a true self, so to speak, or molded our true self into these struggles. And it's like, you basically were entered into a war you thought that was against sin and against the devil. It was a war of you against you. And so to heal, there's a breaking free that has to happen. It's sort of like this diffusion, like an identity diffusion, this state where your sense of self has become fragmented and unclear. Like you're all over the place. There's a part of you that's, I don't know what I think about that. I'm not sure my stance on that. I'm not sure who I am here. What am I about? How am I, who am I sexually? Who am I morally? You don't know what you really want. You don't know who you really are outside of the context of the faith. That confusion is not an accident. It's a feature. It's not a flaw of the indoctrination that we were under. By keeping ourselves unsure of ourselves, the church is ensuring that you remain dependent on their guidance and approval. Your identity is left in a state of perpetual suspension. It never really forms. A lot of us, honestly, I would argue, are still stuck in childhood. We're always waiting for this external validation. We're constantly encouraged to define ourselves through the roles that the church offers us. Are you a disciple? Are you a servant? Are you a prayer warrior? Are you a worship leader? Are you a pastor? You're a missionary. You're never really taught just to see what your own personal aspirations and desires were. And every title that you could take on, every task that you could perform, it's going to reinforce this externally defined identity. And it's going to erase any trace, really, at least for a while, of you, the real individual that's underneath. I remember when I was a little kid, I remember reading the story of Hudson Taylor, who was a missionary from England to China, and it was a huge volume, and I think I read the whole thing, maybe even 2 or 3 volumes, but at least this first one, a huge book for a little kid. For an 8-year-old to read it, it was like, wow, that's a huge book. But he gave up everything to go preach the gospel to the Chinese back in a couple hundred years ago. And that created in me a compulsion. And from the earliest days, I would tell people, my life's ambition is to be the next Hudson Taylor. I want to give my life away. I want to be spent for the gospel, whatever it takes. And that's where Christianity's theft becomes sort of complete for what they're looking for. It's not just changing your personality, it's dissolving it piece by piece. It's rewriting it until what's left, in quotes, is just a construct of the beliefs and behaviors that serve their church's interests, not yours. And because that transformation was framed as like sanctification, you're becoming a new creation in Christ, you never really saw it for what it was. It was, in fact, the systematic erasure of you, of your authentic self. It was the slow replacement of you with an image that fit their narrative. And that's why reclaiming our personalities after leaving Christianity can feel so disorienting. You're not just stepping out of a belief system. You're stepping out of a personality construct that was built around that belief system. And so the walls of this construct that are made of doctrines and scriptures and guilt and shame, even after all those walls come down, they come crumbling down, obviously, with deconversion, you're left, so to speak, standing in the rubble saying, who the hell am I? Where do I begin? And you have to begin, because underneath all these layers of conditioning and indoctrination, the real you is still there, waiting to get out. That playful child, the curious thinker, the creative spirit, the dancer. They were never fully erased. They've been arguably buried, but they've not been destroyed. But as you begin to peel back these layers and deconstruct, digging through the rubble, you start to find those pieces of yourself you thought were lost forever. And reclaiming them is like it's a huge process, painstaking. But every time you unearth another piece, you're like, oh, that's who I am, that's me. I'm starting to feel more whole, more alive, more complete, more me. So, we're going to dig into some of these things, and it's going to go a little longer than I thought, but I'll try to move a little bit faster here. But I want to sort of explore some of the psychological mechanisms that Christianity uses to reshape our personalities, and sort of examining how this is happening, why it's so effective, and what it's going to take for us to reclaim our true selves. So we're going to talk about things like emotional manipulation, cognitive distortion, identity dissolution, and some other toxic ideas that they're just jamming down your mind that have left scars. They've left scars in your personality and your psyche long after you left the faith. And I think understanding that damage is really the first step toward healing it. And reclaiming your identity is where you start. It's how you reclaim your life. Before I get into the first main section again, that was the introduction. It's funny, when I was studying to be a pastor, I remember hearing pastors where they'd say so much, and then he'd say, and that was the introduction. Now I get to my first point and think, oh my God, are you kidding me? Like, it's 30 minutes in and that's the introduction. But today that was the introduction. So this may be a long one. Feel free to jump out when you need to. I definitely understand it's not all you can say the whole time. But this one is probably going to go past an hour. But I want to read a few quick comments here, and then we'll jump in. I'm probably going to have to keep from reading all the comments because otherwise this will be 2 hours. See here, Guitar God, thank you so much for your super chat. I really appreciate that. You were very much appreciated. Thank you so much. Can't say thank you enough for your support for everyone, especially those who can support financially. It makes such a difference right now. Yeah, let's see here. I don't have any problem with theists. They have the mind virus and it's not their fault. Yeah. Truth destroys all fantasies. Yeah. Hey everyone, hey Normie girl. Great to see you. Hey Emily, great to see you here. Thank you so much. Ash the Seeker, I'm so glad you're talking about this. Islam literally took my now I figure myself out. Yeah, Islam would do the same thing, absolutely. I would totally expect that. My brother wanted to learn to play the drums. My father wouldn't allow it because he could use it to praise God. Yeah, drums were very much, the beat of the jungle beat was against the Lord. So good to see everyone, absolutely. Aspects of ourselves are shoved away, drowned. This is why shadow work can be so beneficial. Looking at hidden parts of yourself and bringing them into the light and healing and incorporating them. Yeah, well said. The Christian personality, the hardcore types are very good at turning every conversation into a conversion session. Yeah, that is so true. Christianity hurt us so bad by teaching us that we're inherently wicked. Yeah. That what causes the empty feeling we had, no self, was ever nurtured, only denied. For sure. I'm glad my parents never tried to suppress my personality. That's great to hear. No, I would absolutely say there are definitely some families and churches out there that did not do as dangerous of a job as others. So I'm very glad to hear that there's some people who can testify to that. Christianity was created as a form of state control of the individual. Yeah. Christianity is very unhealthy if you live in an abusive environment. The adults blame you for all their problems, and then God who loves you blames you for his mistakes too. Yeah. I stayed in an abusive relationship because of Christianity. I'm out of both now. I have a lot of work to do, but I feel so much better. That's awesome. Awesome. Wish you well on your journey. Most Christians are hungry for the apocalypse. That alone pulls people out of character. Yeah, absolutely. Why am I thinking of communism? Christianity has destroyed so many minds. Yeah, absolutely. Love inside out. You have communism. Christianity has destroyed so many minds and lives. Yeah, absolutely. Love inside out. Yeah, it's a great story. This character. Yeah, absolutely. Why am I thinking of communism? Christianity has destroyed so many minds and lives. Yeah, absolutely. Love inside out. Yeah, it's a great story. If anyone hasn't seen that, it's corny at times, but it's basically talking about how children's personalities form and how they interact with the world. I mean, if you have small kids, you will appreciate it, and your kids will appreciate it too. Especially if you have like kids, I would say that are preteens or early teens. I mean, absolutely, it will help them. Christians want to bring on the end of the world like gangbusters. They do it too. The U.S. public policy is directly influenced by Christian theology. Yeah, absolutely. I know many Christians cheer when natural disasters happen. Yeah, it's about to happen again. They see it as validation of the Bible, this world, because otherwise good people celebrate death and destruction. Yeah. Like Kitchen said, religion is what it takes for good people to do wicked things. Let's see here. Yes, all the guilt for loving the things of the world, boys, jobs, activities that take away from God's work. Yeah. Christianity taught us that we're evil and we can't trust our own desires. It also taught us to listen to Yahweh's voice for guidance. Yahweh isn't real, so whose voice we're listening to? Yeah. Our own and the pastors and the Bibles. For me, it was strange when I found I was asexual, as I felt that I didn't want to love anyone. Yeah, it's amazing. There's a party line for everything. It is exactly like narcissism. He says it's a great way to put it. I'm going to be, by the way, talking about narcissism and Christianity a lot more in the next couple of weeks, probably sometime this month. I was told I should date men of certain skin tones. When asked why they honestly, genuinely did not have an answer, I could tell they didn't think they were racist and truly didn't know what to say. Yeah. I was running rooms like that as well. The Christian personality is personified fairly accurately by Flanders in a sense. Yeah. Ned Flanders, oh my goodness. I haven't watched him in a while, but yeah, that's a great way to put it. Stephen Mansfield, great to see you here. Reminds me of the 59 Hepburn movie, The Nun story. At the end of her career of self-abnegation, when she cannot continue with her life any longer, she leaves alone with a small suitcase, devastating. Yeah, absolutely. Eric, blessings all. Thanks so much for being here. Forcing children to worship Yahweh is psychological abuse. Yeah, absolutely. The amount of life-altering decisions I made that were against my will was God's will was tragic, violent, incredible, and so much truth I listened to myself. Yeah. I apologize, but I'm going to skip a few of the... I want to read one more here. Just religion, tricks, just great to see you. Religion totally hijacked my mind and personality. My sister probably thinks I have split personality, maybe a demonic spirit that I'm physically happy. Yeah. Absolutely. I want to keep going here with some thoughts, just because this is going to be a longer one, but I do want to jump in, and I'll see if I can do this quickly. I'll get back to some comments in a little bit. But the first thing I want to talk about is the idea of what means overall what I'm about to talk about in the big picture is we're going to talk about subversion. This is a subversion, repression of your identity. They were doing something to you. This was about psychological concepts and mechanisms that they were using. Yeah, they weren't going to school to do this necessarily. We learned in Bible college. I went to Bible college to be a pastor. They don't teach you, hey, this is how you trick your kids, this is how you trick your church. But that's what's happening in reality, and you have to admit it eventually. That's what we were doing. And so the first big area I want to talk about is the idea of internalized control. And we're going to put it this way, we're going to bring in some psychology to it a little bit here. I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist. Please don't ever take anything that I'm saying as if I'm trying to be a counselor. I'm not certified in anything. So take everything with a grain of salt. And if you need a real counselor, definitely know yourself enough to know when you need that. So we're just talking very generically here. But in psychology, there's a concept called superego, and that refers to this internalized voice of authority within us. It's like our internal compass. It's guiding us on what's right and wrong, what's moral and immoral. It's our superego. And it's part of our psyche that emerges more and more as you grow. It's shaped by your parents, of course, your teachers, by the norms of society. And in a healthy context, the superego is going to provide a sort of a balanced sense of ethics and self-regulation. It's going to allow you to navigate the world with an understanding of boundaries and expectations. And that understanding grows over time. But in the context of Christianity, that development of what they call the superego, it's hijacked and twisted by the indoctrination. It's not allowed to form naturally. It's overlaid and overwritten by the doctrines of the church and by the Bible. It turns it into basically a hyperactive, judgmental tyrant. Again, North Korea. It is a hyperactive, judgmental tyrant. The voice of authority in Christianity isn't just present. It isn't just there in the back of your mind, guiding you.
I see a dick in your future. I see a dick.
And omniscient, scrutinizing every mood, every feeling. And so that every time you have something that's a sin or transgression, whether it's external, everyone see it, or it's internal, you just know, oh, I lusted, I thought the wrong thought, told a white lie. It's magnified under that divine spotlight. And the result is that you have this ever-present state of tension and self-monitoring. Your most private thoughts are not your private thoughts anymore. They're no longer a safe haven like they should be for your inner exploration. You're becoming in your mind a person with a battleground. You think for your very soul, but it's a battleground for your thoughts. You're told repeatedly things like take every thought captive. 2 Corinthians 10:5, and be holy as I am holy, and renew your mind, so that there's no impure thought or unfaithful thought that's allowed to stay there and grow and linger. And those verses, they seem all so nice and warm and benign, but they're actually, they became like the scaffolding.
And on that scaffolding, our superego became hyperactive, and it became built on that scaffolding so that this internal surveillance system that polices your actions and your very essence is in charge all over the place. And so when your superego gets hijacked by this religious influence, it's functioning really as a judge, a relentless, all-seeing, condemning judge, so quick to say, you have deviated from what you should. And it's not just about like avoiding sinful actions, like lying or stealing or cheating. It's controlling the hidden, most private corners of your mind and your heart. You have a fleeting doubt about God's goodness, a moment of anger that doesn't reflect the fruit of the Spirit. You have a sexual attraction that sort of strays outside the boundaries of what you think is acceptable. Your indoctrinated superego is going to see these thoughts as existential threats, as betrayals against God's holiness, and the anxiety and guilt that follow.
God damn it.
They're not just casual feelings of remorse. They are intense emotional assaults. They are designed to reinforce the notion that even thinking about stepping out of line is a sign that you are morally corrupt. This is thought suppression. This is, again, a psychological defense mechanism where unwanted thoughts and unwanted impulses are forcibly pushed out of your conscious awareness. But those thoughts are not actually banished. Again, suppressing them doesn't make them go away. It sort of just buries them deeper. It buries them where they're going to eventually come back someday. They're going to simmer. Sort of like, I think of that picture of like lava. The hot lava on the mountain. You don't know when the pressure's going to build up. But over time, this is creating a chronic state of cognitive dissonance. It's like a psychological tension between your natural inclinations, who you are, and the demands of this fabricated superego, and that battle is so exhausting. It leaves you in this constant state of, again, self-policing, self-criticism, and your mind becomes a minefield. And you have to navigate it with extreme caution, otherwise you're going to trigger wave after wave of guilt and self-rebuke. I remember when I was in Bible college, I've said this before on the channel many times, but the men's groups where we get together, like in the men's dorms, and we would have Bible studies and accountability groups. I mean, we all know what they were about. You masturbated again, didn't you? Screw it, I did. Or at least I thought about it, I wanted to. You took that girl's clothes off in your mind, didn't you? Yeah, I did. Took her clothes off and did a whole bunch of other things in my mind, too. Wow, you've really messed up. You should feel so guilty and shameful. And of course, we all did. And then, praise the Lord, God's grace, wave after wave of mercy. We're clean again. What happens when we meet the next week? Same thing. It's the same story over and over and over. Again, you become your own oppressor. You are training yourself. It's this process of training you to become your own oppressor. You eventually don't even need external people like pastors and parents, your youth pastor, to enforce these things. You internalize it so deeply that you become your warden. You play the role of a warden. Let's see here. Make sure if anyone sees any, I don't think there's any trolls right now, but if they see you become your own warden. You're guarding your own heart and your own mind with this obsessive vigilance. And it creates like remember the story of Pavlov's dog, where you ring the bell, the dog salivates. Any deviation from Christian norms, whether it's, again, a stray thought, a flicker of anger, an opinion that doesn't fall in line with what you know what Christians are supposed to think, it triggers an automatic cascade of shame and then fear. And you begin to experience this surge of anxiety at the mere hint of a sinful thought. That conditioning is so powerful that even after you've left Christianity, even after you've escaped Bible prison, those patterns of thought suppression and self-censorship, they can easily persist. I think a lot of former Christians, in the discussions I've had with them in the interviews, they talk about this guilt that can sometimes almost like a surge whenever they entertain certain ideas or behaviors. I mean, imagine somebody saying to you the word erotic. Are you allowed to be erotic? Well, when we were Christian, of course, that was really close to the, if not close to the edge of sinful. It was way over. For some of us, it was, at least, well, if you're erotic within marriage, maybe. But even that, you don't want to get addicted to sex. You want to be addicted to the Lord, and even sex should be like an act of worship. But when you look at this and you have your super ego on this hyperactive autopilot, you're constantly guarding your boundaries. But then when they drop, and you feel like those boundaries are no longer relevant, you still realize that autopilot is still an autopilot. Your mind has been conditioned for so long to operate within these strict confines of Christian morality that struggling, the idea of expanding beyond it, struggling to expand beyond what you were taught before and to think outside the box is so, it's like you just can't do it. Your cognitive rigidity is going to set in. You're going to have this mental inflexibility that's going to prevent you from fully embracing new ways of thinking, even though you're no longer, you don't have to. Maybe some of you would say, address the question, is it morally wrong to be in a polyamorous relationship where everyone is agreeing this is an acceptable thing? Well, for some people, they would just default to, oh shit, of course not. Polyamory is always wrong. Well, why? And you have to think through, you have to unpack, why did I think polyamory was wrong as a Christian, and isn't necessarily wrong now if everyone is in agreement, if it's something that's been discussed openly and so forth, and there's nothing hidden behind the scenes, as it were.
God, fucking.
I wanted to take this particular point in a little different direction too. Think about the fear that you might have had whenever you might have felt whenever you had a sinful thought. Like let's say that you were daydreaming about something. And let's not even make it specific. Let's just say you're daydreaming about something that didn't necessarily involve God's guidance. Like let's say you imagined pursuing a career. Maybe you really wanted to be playing music. And not necessarily worship music, you just wanted to play music. Maybe you wrote some songs, maybe you had someone that you idolized, I just love the way Billy Joel does this, or Alanis Morissette does that. I'm an age, to share my age here. But I love this artist, I would love to pursue that. But I wouldn't necessarily do it for the church. If you're thinking of imagining some kind of life that's independent of the church oversight. That thought might have at first sort of had a spark of excitement for you, and you envision this future where you have agency over your choices. But before that thought could really take root, you had this internal voice, this hyperactive superego that's going to cut in and say, how dare you use your musical abilities not for the church and for worship? How dare you not consult God's plan A for your life? It's almost like you have this voice that it creates in your head. Like, why are you intent on ruining your life? Do you really want to sin or choose plan B against the very God who loves you and has a plan A for your life? And this isn't just, again, a fleeting moment of guilt you could brush off. It becomes a wave after wave of assault of shame that sweeps over you. And it really makes you second guess everything. It makes you second guess your intentions. And it really, I think for a lot of us, made us retreat back. Like these prescribed beliefs become our comfort zone. We feel safe. And we feel like, oh, I'm testing the waters in a way that's, this is not of the Lord. And when you go back, and everything, your emotions are even, and you have this rush of anxiety. Oh my gosh, what the hell am I doing? And you have this desperate need to repent and submit and to realign yourself with what you know is right. And then that emotional assault conditions you to fear even the slightest deviation from that norm. And again, you become watching over yourself.
Not yet.
Shortly. Christ. Every desire is in line with what Christianity demands. You become both a prisoner and the guard. You're trapped in a mental prison. That's why we keep saying Bible. Christianity is Bible prison. It's trapped you in a mental prison of your own making, of the church's making. You will clamp down on any thought that doesn't conform, anything that doesn't fit, any dream that doesn't align, and you become a master of self-censorship. You edit your own inner monologue so thoroughly that even the faintest whisper of dissent is smothered before it can be fully heard. And that is the triumph, if I can put it that way, the triumph in quotes, of indoctrination. It's not just enforcing external obedience. Now, there were people that did go that route, and it was just external, and you could tell. They're the kids that are smoking outside of church, or whatever. They're the kids that are, you kind of know that they're going on dates, and they're kind of feeling each other up. in the movie theater. Like, well, you're not really on fire for the Lord. But for many of us, it was not that. It was very real. They implanted these mechanisms of control so deeply that we enforced obedience upon ourselves. We became a very loyal subject of this mental regime that kept us in line, so that when there's no external enforcers around, it's the same outcome. We will enforce it ourselves. Those dynamics and these consequences shaped how you thought, but also how you saw yourself. When you see your mind as a battleground, when you see your emotions as enemies, when you see your desires as a trap that has been set to lead you astray, you learn to mistrust yourself. You learn to mistrust yourself so deeply that you can't tell where your own voice ends and the voice of indoctrination begins. It's like this shadowy presence has taken up residence in your mind, always watching, always ready to strike again, called the Holy Spirit, but it's always ready to strike down any attempt at self-liberation. And that shadow is your hyperactive superego. It's this prison word holds the keys to your mental freedom, but refuses to set you free. Because it's so goddamn scary. Because it feels like it's sinful. And you're ruining your life. And that's why reclaiming your mind from that shadow is a long process, but it starts with recognizing these subtle ways in which this was installed in you. Because it's so goddamn scary. Because it feels like it's sinful. And you're ruining your life. And that's why reclaiming your mind from that shadow is a long process, but it starts with recognizing these subtle ways in which this was installed in you. Your thoughts are not inherently sinful. Your desires are not shameful. Your emotions are not betrayers, they're yours. They're natural parts of your humanity. They deserve to be expressed and felt and embraced. And so the journey to dismantle this hyperactive self-ego it becomes a journey back to you, where your mind is once again a place of safety, of refuge, of exploration and true freedom. I think that leads really on to the next big point, which is what I want to call emotional hijacking. When we're talking really about repressing yourself and denying your authenticity. Emotions play so large scale. They're powerful indicators of what's really going on inside of our true selves. Our emotions are often raw, at least as kids. They're raw, they're unfiltered. They're these expressions of our internal state, just like that movie. Inside Out, which I really appreciate the work that they did on that movie. I imagine they had a whole bunch of psychiatrists to really inform them on that one. But our most immediate visceral responses to the world around us are our emotions. And in a healthy psychological environment, our emotions are good. They're going to guide us. They're going to reveal our needs and our boundaries and our desires. They're going to help us navigate life with authenticity and with self-awareness. But in Christianity, it feels like for so many of us, emotions are not just personal experiences. They're categorized, they're judged, they're hyper-controlled, they're divided into these opposing camps. There's these godly emotions like joy, peace, gratitude. There's these sinful emotions like anger, lust, pride, and doubt. And you're so conditioned to embrace the one side
that
it creates this rift, a fundamental rift within your emotional world. It is emotionally hijacking you. And it teaches you to see your own feelings as some of your worst enemies, as your adversaries. And that distortion, it doesn't just affect how you feel in particular moments. It's reshaping your entire worldview. It's reshaping your entire relationship with your emotional self. I mean, imagine what happens when these natural healthy emotions that are integral to a human experience, when they're labeled as threats, even threats that don't seem to be be aware of them, they need to be eradicated. Anger can be a good thing sometimes, obviously under control, but anger can signify that boundaries have been crossed, or you've witnessed something that's unjust. And instead, it gets reframed in Christianity very often as a sign of spiritual deficiency. Lust. Lust is something I've learned to fantasize and enjoy my lust completely at this point. I love how healed I am with this. But when we're Christians, lust, which is a normal expression of sexual attraction, it was demonized as a gateway to eternal damnation. I mean, think of those verses where Paul talks about every other sin is outside the body, but sexual sin is in the body.
And of course, even as a Christian, we're taught, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. And if you lusted after a woman, it's as much as if you've had an affair with her. Pride. This was a big deal. Pride was like the biggest deal out there. That was Satan. Satan fell. The whole thing crashed from the beginning because of Satan's pride. Pride is in a good sense, it's a source of self-esteem and motivation, but it's condemned as the root of all kinds of evils. And all those emotions are stripped of their human context, and they're turned into pathologies. They're moral failings. And again, the effect is a complete emotional disorientation. You begin to distrust your own inner compass. You view your natural emotions as sinful traps. They're pulling you away from God. They're not meaningful indicators of your lived experience. And that emotional subjugation is devastating from the psychology of it. In so many of these live streams, we're going to start to bring in the psychology of what were they doing to us. You have to understand Christianity was doing something to you. The repression of these emotions, especially the ones that were called sinful, it's going to lead to what we call an emotional incongruence, where you're taught to fear or ignore your feelings. And
you might feel sad, but instead of acknowledging it, you force yourself to project joy. I know I'm sad, I'm going to pretend to be joyful.
Oh!
I'm sad when the Lord has redeemed me from hell and given me His righteousness. I'm going to heaven. What would possibly be a reason to not have joy of the Lord?
That's what a good Christian is supposed to feel. Or again, going back to anger. Instead of expressing anger, you're supposed to, or exploring, why you're angry, you suppress it, and you try to arbitrarily muster up forgiveness. Maybe even when the situation legitimately warrants outrage. Not outrage that's going to turn into violence, of course, but there's certain places in life where you should be outraged, and you should be angry at certain things that are happening. Over time, that self-censorship leads to a place where you lose the ability to identify or express your emotions effectively. It's not just that you can't articulate your feelings, it's like you're in a state of emotional numbness. You become so disconnected from your emotions that you can't access them. It's like a part of your mind that you're supposed to process and you're supposed to use to understand these feelings. They've been locked away in sort of a mental cage. And they've left you with this flat, boring, muted experience of life. And when you live like that, when you're cut off from the full range of your own humanity, it's like walking through a world that's drained of color. Imagine going back to like black and white TV now. Everything feels dimmer, like many shades dimmer than it should. You might experience some moments of joy, but they're fleeting and shallow. You might experience sadness, but it's like a distant echo instead of a full body wave of grief. I mean, imagine funerals. When you're having a funeral for a Christian, and you're a Christian, you're kind of in this frame of mind to say, I shouldn't really be sad because I haven't really lost them. I'm going to have them again in just a few years. God's going to take me either because the rapture's coming, or someday I'll die myself. It's not that long compared to eternity. I haven't really lost them, so don't grieve. All these kinds of things, they're twisting it so much. And you're feeling something, but you can't name it, you can't express it, and sometimes you can't even feel it in a way that makes sense. And the emotional landscape that's should, as a human, be vibrant and rich, it's reduced to this barren plain where only these approved feelings are allowed to take root and grow. And so you start with this emotional numbness, but that repression becomes greater and greater because it's affecting not just your emotions and the emotional clarity that you could have, but it's affecting your ability to make decisions and to build relationships. Because again, if your emotions are sort of on stun, remember this from Star Trek where you stun somebody, sometimes it just kind of knocks them down, sometimes it puts them to sleep, sometimes it kind of almost puts them close to death. But it's like you're stunned. And when you're emotionally stunned that much, and you're so repressed, your decision-making ability where your emotions come into play, your relationships where your emotions come into play, it just doesn't work the right way. And your emotions are not isolated experiences. They're influencing how you see yourself, how you interact with others, how you perceive the world at large. And when certain emotions are suppressed and labeled as dangerous, and you start to fear them, and then by extension you fear yourself, you become afraid of your own mind. You become afraid of your own body and its desires. You become afraid of your sexuality. You maybe become afraid of the people around you because they're probably dealing with the same thing. I'm afraid of myself, I'm afraid of them. And you begin to censor yourself preemptively. You shut down the emotional impulses that might lead to sin. This emotional hijacking is becoming emotional warfare. You are at war with your own nature. You are caught in a cycle of self-policing that leaves you exhausted and disconnected from your true self. I mean, think about again how this plays out. Think about something as basic as sexual attraction. You are taught to suppress any hint of sexual desire, no matter how natural or harmless it seemed at the time. Lust was framed as a gateway to a lot of bad things, even hell. It was a symptom of moral decay. Your flesh is leading you astray. So even like a passing glance at someone is attractive, which is an automatic human response. For many of us, it triggered waves of guilt and shame, especially if, like, from a man's perspective. I didn't just notice her. I noticed her shape and her curves. And like, oh my God, I saw her, her dress pulled off a little bit. I saw her bra strap. Like bloody hell! It's like, oh my God, you're so guilty. You're taught to avert your eyes. You're taught to pray for God's help in cleansing your mind. Because if I don't marry her, then I just looked at the bra strap of a woman. It's not my wife, and I kind of lusted. What a sick, horrible person I've become. And you go back, cleaning your mind, reciting scriptures about purity and righteousness until the desire subsided in some way. But again, did it really subside, or did it just go underground? Did it get buried beneath these layers of guilt? Is it going to resurface in other ways? Probably more destructive ways down the line. This is emotional conditioning. You're becoming, again, like this Pavlovian dog. You're associating every impulse, every attraction, every hint of desire with guilt and shame. You're caught in a perpetual feedback loop where the initial feeling is immediately followed by condemnation and self-rebuke. And over time, that cycle becomes automatic. Feeling, self-rebuke, feeling, self-rebuke, feeling, shame. Just bam, bam. They go together. You don't need external forces anymore. You police yourself. Involuntarily, reflexively. And the more you do it, the more you lose touch with your own desires, the more you're left feeling hollow, disconnected, and you're eventually alienated from your own body and your own emotions. And that dissonance, it doesn't just confuse you, it makes you afraid of your own self, of your own feelings. The very sensations that bring you pleasure and connection and fulfillment, they get associated in this world with danger and sin. You start to see your body as the enemy. The Bible does describe the body as the enemy in various ways. It's a source of temptation that has to be kept under strict control. So you're monitoring your thoughts constantly, censoring anything that could lead you down the path of pride and lust. And basically what's happening here is your relationship with yourself has become hyper-adversarial. You are constantly at odds with your own instincts. You are caught in a struggle to subdue the right part of yourself, the parts of yourself that make you human. Think about that. Like we're talking about like a slice of it, like a picture, like a snapshot. This is what we're doing to ourselves. But imagine this is part of a movie. Like when if you look at a movie, you freeze frame and say that's one picture. And if it was like 30 or 60 frames per second, like there's a lot of pictures in this movie. But this is one single frame from this 1 millisecond. But put it out to the big picture of a movie where you're talking about the long-term effects of this kind of emotional hijacking. A lot of ex-Christians have described this lingering sense of numbness or emotional flatness long after they've left the faith. They're struggling to feel the joy or excitement, or they maybe feel themselves unable to connect with others on a deeper level. It's about circuitry. We've gone to the illustration metaphor of the computer a few times. It's like your emotional circuitry has been disrupted, or software has been hacked by years of suppression. It's not functioning properly. And emotions that should arise naturally in response to certain like grief or anger or joy, they're stunted and distorted. And they leave you feeling disconnected from your own experience. It's like you're outside looking in, like, oh, I'm going through this. I wonder how I should feel. Why am I not just feeling it right now? Rebuilding your emotional world after that kind of systemic suppression attack is not easy. You have to unlearn these automatic associations between emotion and guilt. You have to relearn how to feel without fear. You have to reconnect parts of yourself that have been locked away, perhaps for years, maybe even decades. It is possible, but man, it's work. And slowly you're beginning to reclaim your emotions, and you're seeing them not as threats, but as guides that point you toward a more authentic life. They're allowing you to feel part of pangs of anger, or desire, or lust, or eroticism. And you learn to feel them without trying to immediately extinguish it. You can acknowledge a moment of desire without rushing to repentance. You can have a sense of pride in yourself without thinking, oh, this is going to lead to a downfall. Pride before fall. Reclaiming your emotional self is an act of rebellion against the conditioning that sought to suppress it, which is Christianity. You're declaring your emotions are yours to feel, they're mine to feel, they're ours to express, they're ours to understand. You're beginning on this journey back to emotional wholeness, and this rift between your feelings and you can start to slowly, finally heal. So your emotions aren't just part of you, they are you. They deserve to be felt and embraced and celebrated in all of their raw, unfiltered glory. The third part I want to talk about this after those sections is the idea of learned helplessness. We talked about this a couple weeks ago, but I think this is a really big piece of it. Learned helplessness is the idea that you're paralyzing your own sense of agency. Christianity arguably instills a profound form of learned helplessness through the doctrine of human depravity and the supposed need for God's guidance, interaction or intervention in your life. But from a very young age, you're taught that if you are left to your own devices, you are absolutely doomed to failure and sin because, like Jeremiah 17:9, the heart's deceitful above all things like that. Your righteousness is like a filthy rag. Those beliefs go far beyond just promoting humility or saying you need to rely on God in some generic, helpful sense. It's directly attacking your sense of autonomy, directly attacking your competence. You are made to feel so fundamentally flawed and incapable of making wise decisions that even your most benign inclinations are portrayed as suspect. They're potentially dangerous because they can take you away from God's will. Your human instincts, whether it's a desire to assert yourself, the ambition to succeed, the pursuit of some kind of self-determination, you see it as tainted by sin. The phrase that we all learn so much, even as little kids, lean not on your own understanding. Proverbs 3:5, it becomes this continual warning signpost, a constant reminder, your reasoning is untrustworthy. Your perceptions and your decisions are inherently flawed and cannot be relied upon. And over time, that conditioning is completely undermining your sense of agency. It creates this deep fear of independence. You cannot be an independent agent. Everything is about you and God and your submission to Him. You become so accustomed to question your own thoughts and your own motives that you kind of become paralyzed. And as some of us would say, at times we almost felt unable to take the smallest step forward, the smallest step, without second-guessing ourselves. Is this the will of God? Should I buy the red car or the blue car? Should I date this person, that person? Should I take this class or that class? Am I taking algebra 2 or calculus? Which one? Oh God, please show me. Please help me to know which class is the right one. You're persistently undermining your own judgment and creates a psychological paralysis. Decisions that should be fairly straightforward, simply what do you want to do? What career do you want? What are your passions? What relationship do you want? It becomes fraught with anxiety and fear. And you're supposed to defer these decisions to God or maybe to church leaders and your spiritual mentors. It's stunting your development as an independent individual and creating a very deep dependency on this system that's perpetuating your helplessness. You're basically developing a dependency complex. You're unable to make decisions or take action without seeking external approval or guidance. You have to take everything to the Lord in prayer. Everything to the Lord in prayer. And when you are constantly deferring to external sources of authority, you're diminishing your confidence in your ability to navigate life.
You know Him?
Yeah. I mean, every time you question your judgment, every time you hold back and refrain on acting on something, you're receiving some external confirmation. God, show me the sign. Where I'm going to put my fleece. Show me a sign. Which way? God, open the door.
Wow.
Or if you don't want me to do this, close it. Yes. No, it's a wait. You're reinforcing the belief you're incapable of handling life on your own. You're gradually eroding your self-esteem, your self-efficacy. You've led to a pervasive sense of incompetence. It's not incidental. It's a fundamental feature of how Christianity is shaping its followers. When you convince people that they're weak and
the
$150
match, I haven't bought it yet.
You as a church and as a religion position yourself as the necessary guiding force, and these people
I'll look into
church, the Bible, the Holy Spirit, God's word. I mean, this learned helplessness, this condition where you are repeatedly subjected to these situations in which you have no control and power to change circumstances, and you learn over time to believe you are helpless. I mean, even when there's opportunities for you to take action and to take control, even though this learned helplessness instills in you this relentless messaging, you are broken and cannot make decisions only God can make for you. You're not whole, God can make you whole. You can't trust yourself, you can't rely on yourself, you can't navigate life's complexities without divine intervention. And every time you're told, pray for guidance. Gosh, we were told, don't even eat a meal without praying or bad things will happen. But especially in the decisions of life, pray before you make a decision. Pray before you start the car for a trip. No matter how small or personal the issue was, pray. Let God guide you. And that dependency is going to manifest itself in all kinds of ways. I mean, seeking God's will before making even the most trivial choices. To take that job, move to that city, marry that person, what passion do you have, what desire do you have, what's your aspiration, what's your value, everything. Your pride is the big issue, and it's even dangerous. The process of waiting on God's will puts you in a state of analysis paralysis. You're so afraid to make the wrong choice. You're so terrified of stepping out of God's perfect will and plan. You become incapable of making any choice at all. You feel trapped, frozen in this perpetual state of indecision because taking initiative can feel like a risk that you're not equipped to handle. And think about the aftermath of those decisions that you were finally able to make. Even after choosing a path that felt like you were probably aligned with God's will, did you really feel confident? Or did you find yourself second-guessing yourself, saying, I wonder if I heard God's voice correctly? Any sign of difficulty or challenge, maybe it was seen as evidence, maybe you made a mistake. Maybe I pushed forward and God didn't want me to. I kind of forced the door open. God was trying to say no, I shut the door. And I forced myself through. It's another form of learned helplessness, believing that any deviation from a smooth, obstacle-free path indicates a failure on your part. A sign that you are
stupid!
And that mentality is going to trap you.
Cause that was stupid!
Constant self-doubt and self-criticism. It's going to leave you unable to fully own your choices or even to take pride in your accomplishments when it turns out well. Like, how many of us struggle so much when someone said, you did a great job?
Stupid!
Response was, I want to give all glory to God.
Yeah,
because that was so damn stupid.
We couldn't do it. We couldn't take a good job. Saying well done to you was like we knew that we'd hear it in heavens, perhaps. Hopefully. Well done, my good faithful servant. But a well done here on earth. It was like, if I don't immediately deflect this to God's glory, I'm taking pride in myself. I don't want to do that. I don't want to risk out on the rewards of heaven, if anything else. Again, the long-term effects of this are profound. Even after you've left the faith, you might find yourself struggling to make decisions with confidence. It's like this conditioning has lingered. Again, like a shadow that's whispering to you, you're not capable. You need someone else's guidance. You can't trust your own instincts. This is a residue of the Bible's influence. This persistent feeling of inadequacy that's seeped into every aspect of our lives. And you might even find yourself avoiding certain opportunities because they seem too daunting. You might notice, again, there's a tendency to seek validation from others before you make a move. This is like a ghost, a residual reflection of our learned helplessness. It's sapping your self-assurance. It's keeping you tethered to the beliefs that maybe you tactically left them behind, but you didn't fully. Every time you defer to an external authority, every time you hesitate to make a decision on your own, you reinforce these neural pathways of learned helplessness in your brain. And the more that you engage in these behaviors, the more entrenched they become. and it becomes increasingly difficult to break free. It's as if your brain has been rewired to prioritize inaction over action, submission over assertion, and dependence over autonomy. I mean, your autonomy has been stripped away from you. And that psychological restructuring is not easy to undo. It can be undone, but it's not easy. It requires us to have a conscious, deliberate effort to rewire our brains and to reclaim our sense of agency. It means practicing starting making decisions, maybe starting with small ones, without seeking anyone's approval. It means allowing ourselves to take risks, make mistakes, and learn from them without immediately falling into some kind of self-criticism. Oh, look, this was bound to happen. I was trusting myself too much. So what? So you learn a life lesson. Challenging the internalized belief that you are inherently flawed or incompetent is critical. I know it's uncomfortable. For some of us, it's frightening because it's stepping out of these familiar patterns and this dependence that we've had that we usually even think were virtues. It wasn't like a bad thing to us. This was like virtue. Trust in the Lord, depend on the Lord. But with each step you take, with each autonomy step that you build, every decision you make on your own, you are making a new, probably an actual neural pathway, but you're prioritizing your self-trust, your self-reliance, your self-worth. You know, whenever you were waiting for a sign, how many opportunities did you pass up? How many things could you have pushed through for? And looking back, you're maybe relationships, people you could have dated, you would have dated, but you didn't see God opening the doors quite strongly enough. Maybe someone wasn't godly enough, and they were otherwise a great fit. You could have dated them, and they would have been a wonderful fit. But at the time, you're like, they're not godly enough. They don't seem like they'd be a preacher or a missionary, so I'm going to write them off. I mean, maybe some of you were torn about some of the situations where you said, damn it, if I could go back in time, that would have been a great person for me to have dated. Who knows what could have happened? So you want to imagine what it would feel like to look at these opportunities and seize them, to pursue your dreams, and to not fear or hesitate. I mean, imagine what it would live like, what it would be like to live with the confidence that your desires and your judgments are valid, and you don't need divine permission or anyone else's for that matter to live your life to the fullest. You are, again, reclaiming your sense of agency, and that becomes a revolutionary act against Bibleism. You're declaring, I'm not bound by the constraints of learned helplessness. I can navigate my own damn path. Thank you very much. I am the captain of my soul. This is an affirmation that your mind, your will, and your decisions are yours. They're yours to wield. You're not helpless. You never were. And every time that I exercise my autonomy, every time you do, every time we choose for ourselves, we reclaim a little bit more of that power that was always rightfully ours. It's a lot. It's a lot here. Let's see where am I? A little over an hour, okay. I want to move quickly through that. I believe 2 more points. I wanted to talk about the way that our self was fragmented by Christianity. Think about, we talk a lot about cognitive dissonance on this channel. That psychological tension that arises when you're holding 2 different beliefs, that are contradictory, but you're supposed to hold them simultaneously. You're trying to balance on this tightrope that's being pulled in opposite direction. 1 foot on the side of belief, 1 foot on the side of doubt. And your mind is straining under the pressure to keep those contradictions in harmony. And the discomfort that comes from that is very disorienting in the context of Christianity especially. But it isn't just, again, an anomaly. It's a foundational experience. It's woven into the fabric, into the core of Christianity's theology and teachings. Every doctrine seems to carry an inherent contradiction. God is loving and merciful, but he condemns billions to eternal torment forever for failing to believe correctly. You're saved by grace, which is a gift freely given, but you're judged by your works, measured by your adherence to the commandments and rituals. You're a beloved child of God, but you're also a wretched sinner, deserving of eternal punishment. Endless contradictions, and you'd go on for that for hours, days, but they're not just presented as unquestionable truths. They're not just presented as truths to you, but they're unquestionable
now
truths.
Now fuck up and over
they demand your acceptance. You're like, this defies logic. This defies reason. And the answer that I was given over was the word paradox. It's a paradox. It is not cognitive dissonance. It is not a contradiction. It's a paradox. They can play word salad and make up all kinds of ways to try to explain this away. What they're doing is demanding your acceptance of questionable ideas and making them reframe in your mind as unquestionable truths. You are creating in your mind.
Damn! He broke like a dog.
Into this psychological environment,
Oh!
internal conflict. Usually when we encounter contradictions, we try to resolve them, right?